It's so enjoyable seeing our kids come up on stage because they do what all of us are thinking on the inside. So I know that during the sermon, all of you, or many of you, are wanting to run out the door. Some of you are trying to go back to mom and all that other kind of stuff. So it is good to see them. And it's also good to be back with you again this week. As I shared with you last week, I did miss all of you while we were on vacation and received so much encouragement from you after last week's sermon. In fact, I wanted to share one comment that I did receive from, actually it was from a guest. And in the comment form of their guest card, they wrote, "We really enjoyed the sermon. And the members are extremely friendly." Now, I shared that with you not because they commented anything about the sermon, but because they commented about you. I love it so much whenever I don't get a chance to talk to any of the guests, because there is a line of our members that are overwhelming them, trying to get to know them and make them feel at home here, being very friendly with them. I love that. I love it whenever I don't get a chance to invite somebody out to lunch because somebody's already done it. I love how friendly you are, and I hear those comments time and time again. But I don't think we need to fool ourselves into thinking that we've made it to the point we need to be just yet. Because there is a big difference between being friendly and what we are called to be. We are not called to be friendly, but we are called to be community. And so for the next 2 weeks, we're going to spend some time talking about what it means to be community. Now, if you do not believe that there is a difference between being friendly and being community, then just take, for example, the story of Adele Gabori. Her story was told in a 1993 Boston Globe newspaper. How her neighbors were just so friendly. Whenever her grass grew up and it was unkept, they took care of it. They mowed it themselves. Whenever her water pipes had frozen and they burst and she was just running water everywhere, they didn't call her. They called the water company themselves and had the water shut off. But what they never did was to call and check and see if Adele was still alive. And so when the mail started to overflow out of her house into the porch there, they finally called the police, and the police burst into the home to find the 73-year-old Adele dead. And by all accounts, she had been dead for about 4 years. See, there is a big difference between being friendly and being community. And I know that you sit there and say, there's no way that anything like that would happen around us. But do you know that every single week there are people that walk in these doors and you are friendly to them. You smile at them. You say hi to them. You may even talk about the weather or about the sports, but they are dying. Do you know that there are marriages that are crumbling, that are falling apart in this building every single week, but you don't know about it because you're not being a community? I want you to look at what Jesus prayed for His disciples. One of the last recorded prayers that we have of Him takes place in John chapter 17, the 4th Gospel. And it is the longest recorded prayer that we have of Jesus. Verse 20, Jesus says, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. Now, Scott mentioned that our faith is personal. Every single person in this room either has gone through a crisis of faith or will soon go through a crisis of faith, where you finally have to develop a faith of your own. For some, it is whenever they graduate high school and they move out on their own, whether it be going to college or they just get a place of their own and they're not living around their parents anymore. For some, it's whenever their child died or their spouse left them. That all of a sudden, everything that they just simply accepted as true, it doesn't seem true anymore. And you have to wrestle with faith to make it your own faith. And the Gospel of John tells us later in John chapter 20 that the reason he has written this account is so that you would believe. Jesus here prays that every single person that would ever live, he's already prayed for his intimate friends, the close circle around him. But now he's praying for all who would believe. Every single person that ever will live. That they would believe, that they would have a faith that is personal. Because you cannot always live on someone else's faith. But your faith cannot be private. Continue with me. Verse 21. That all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you. And they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them and will continue to make you known in order that the love you have for me may be in them and that I myself may be in them. It's interesting here that what Jesus prays for is not for success for this movement that he's starting. He doesn't pray for safety of those who are going to believe in his name. He doesn't pray for comfort. He doesn't pray for happiness. Instead, what Jesus prays for is the formation of this community. Because Jesus knows that we are created for community. That every single one of us, we are created for community. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, as we have this story being told of God setting up the world and working as a master creator, there's one thing that he notices and says, it's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. Have you ever wondered why it is that it is not good for man to be alone? Have you ever wondered why, whenever we try to imagine the most cruel punishment that we can place on any individual, that what our human brains can conceive of is isolation? Whenever we really want to punish somebody, we think of solitary confinement. Because we're created. We are hardwired for relationships. And it doesn't matter if you have an extroverted personality or an introverted personality. It may look different for you, but every single person alive is created for community. And scientists are just now discovering that this is true, what the Bible said long ago. Whenever infants are born prematurely, the common practice for a long time was to keep them isolated, to keep them in this bubble, to not stress them because their lungs weren't fully developed. And so if you handled them too much, you might upset them and force them to start crying, and their lungs aren't fully developed for that. But now what they are starting to discover is that if you take a premature infant and you massage their back for just 15 minutes, 3 times a day, that baby will gain weight at a rate they will gain 46% more weight than an infant that is just left alone by themselves. Now, they are not given any more food. There is just something hardwired in them that whenever they are touched, whenever they are aware that they are connected with another human being, that they begin to flourish. And that these premature babies, that they will get out an average of 6 days earlier than those who were not massaged, saving about $3,000 each in hospital costs. See, this is brand new science that people are starting to discover, and we can look at it and say, God said it all along. Because we are created in God's image. Did you notice the way that Jesus prayed for the community? He prayed that they would be one just as you, Father, and I are one. Because we are created in the image of God. Every one of us, if you'll excuse the sports metaphor for just a moment, every one of us is wearing the same uniform. Whenever you are immersed into the waters of Christ, you are taking off your jersey, you're putting on the jersey of Christ, and every single one of us are wearing the same uniform. And yet, just because you're wearing the same uniform doesn't mean you're on the same team. Just ask Jonathan Martin. He was an offensive lineman drafted by the Miami Dolphins. A high draft pick, was assured of making millions of dollars. And yet, very quickly he discovered that there were those wearing the same uniform as him that did not treat him as if they were. One of them in particular, named Richie Incognito, started to harass him and did it under the guise of a rookie hazing. But it began to cross the boundary and became very personal attacks against Jonathan Martin, to the point that he left the team, gave up football for a time, and walked away from millions of dollars. And here are 2 men that are extremely large men, wearing the same uniform, using the same playbook, working on the same offensive line. They weren't competing for the spot. They were sharing an offensive line. They were working as a team. And yet, it wasn't treated that way. We are created to be in community. But community doesn't just happen whenever you put on a uniform. Community is intentional. Community does not just simply happen. Whenever you move into a new neighborhood, it doesn't just happen that you have a community. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate to move a number of different times and to move into different states and different cities. And I know that forming relationships does not happen just simply by accident. That it is something that has to be intentional. And yet community is something that flies in the face of the direction that our world is moving in. Our world is increasingly becoming more private. We want private fences. We want private storage. Private garages. All as a means of isolating ourselves. In fact, Google, a few years ago, they created a database of books that were published from the 1500s to 2008. And in that span, there were 5 million books that were published. And as a result of this database, they were able to start to trace the language that was used over that time period in the books that were published. They started to notice that there were certain words that began to be used more frequently. Words like self-actualization. Words like personalized. And less popular were words like community, share, and the common good. And I know that whenever I start talking about community, for some of us, we start to have all kinds of anxieties that start to bubble up towards the surface. We have these anxieties, these fears about really being known. And if that's you, I want to encourage you, please come back next week, because I'm going to spend more time on that next week. Because I get that. I get the fears of having somebody know your flaws. I mean, some of you look at me and I stand up here every single week and I tell stories and I tell stories about myself, and you look at me as somebody that's okay with being known. But what you don't understand is I get to choose what stories I tell you. I can paint whatever picture I want you to see of me, and that makes it very comfortable for me. Is I can control how you view me. But to really be in community and allow people to see my vulnerabilities, allow people to see the mistakes that I've made, to allow people to see my ignorance, all the things that I don't know. It's scary. And you have to be very intentional about overcoming it. Perhaps that's why the first church was intentional about it. In Acts chapter 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. They devoted themselves to fellowship. They devoted themselves. They committed themselves to this word called fellowship. They had a commitment to being in each other's lives on a daily basis. They shared bread. They prayed for and with each other. Because the Godhead is not just the reason that we enter into communities, but it's also the model. I want you to look with me again in John chapter 17, verse 24. Jesus prays, Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory, the glory you have given me, because you loved me before the creation of the world. This echoes the way that Jesus began the prayer all the way back in verse 1. When he says, Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. So it's not just that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are in this somehow mysterious, eternal relationship, but the purpose that they are in this relationship is revealed to us as well. Their purpose is to serve the others. Jesus says, Father, your purpose is to glorify me. My purpose is to glorify you. The Holy Spirit, His job is to glorify us. And that's why we live in this relationship with one another. Tim Keller writes about this, and he says that the whole purpose of the Trinity is the Father, Son, and the Spirit are all united in trying to glorify each other, trying to lift one another up so the world might be healed and restored, because everyone in the world acknowledges the glory of God. There is oneness in purpose. There's oneness in purpose, that the Godhead is united. And there is a oneness in purpose that we are united together. Which brings up this question that I think every single one of us must wrestle with and ask ourselves, am I caring for anyone else? See, I know that our tendency is, whenever we gather here, that as soon as it's over, we start to evaluate the worship service. And whenever we leave, we start to say, well, I didn't think that was very good because I didn't get anything out of it. And our evaluation is all about what we got out of being there. But the community that Jesus is forming in us and through us forces us to ask a different set of questions. It forces us to ask the question, how did I better somebody else by me being there? Instead of coming to this place seeking to receive a blessing, those who are in Christ come and they seek to be a blessing to somebody else. That's why Paul wrote in Galatians 6, verse 1, that we are to carry each other's burdens. Our world is asking the question, can you be a Christian and not go to church? And as I look at this prayer of Jesus, as I look at the fact that there are over 30 commands in the New Testament alone that you cannot follow if you are not in community with another follower of Christ, I think the answer has to be no. That what it really means to be a follower of Christ is that it is relational, that you are in relationship with somebody else. Just simply to gather doesn't mean that we are together. Walt Disney is one of the greatest visionaries maybe in the history of America. He had the dream of a community. He called it the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. in which he envisioned that there would be 20,000 people that would live in this community, and because of the technological advances, that they would live in radically unique ways that would be far superior to any other community that ever existed. The problem was that Walt Disney died before his dream was fulfilled. And you know what was his dream now as Epcot. It's an amusement center. It's a place that you go to visit. And Jesus has left a blueprint for His church that is so vast, it is so marvelous, and so innovative. A living, breathing, expanding family of believers that would permeate and transform the whole world. The problem is that as time went on, too many people have started to view this as some place that you come and you visit. But according to Jesus, community is inseparable from your relationship with God. You cannot separate your relationship with one another and your relationship with God. That's why I began by saying that your faith, it is personal, but it can never be private. John will later write in one of his letters, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Do you hear that, church? That you cannot go around talking about how you love God and divorce that from your relationship with a community of faith. That it's not just simply about niceties, it's not just about pleasantries, but it is about community, about being in deep intimacy with other people, where you are coming and you're gathering and you are seeking to bless them, gathering for a common purpose to build one another up. This is Jesus' prayer. On the night when He is out in the garden alone, and the crowds are about to come and arrest Him, He spends some time praying for Himself. He spends some time praying for what was about to unfold. But the majority of His prayer was about this formation of a community that would be unlike any that has ever existed. Your faith, it is deeply personal. And you need to work very hard to make it a personal faith that you have between you and God. And you're not depending on me. You're not depending on the elders. You're not depending on any radio program or television program or your favorite Christian author. But you are dependent upon God Himself. But you cannot let your faith remain private. You have to share it with others. And what we call that is church. We have greatly distorted this beautiful word, church. And I'm just as guilty. I still tell our daughters that we're going to go to church, but the reality is that we aren't going to church. The reality is that you are the church. We are the church. And so as we dismiss every single week, we don't dismiss church, but we dismiss rather to go and be church. We don't dismiss so that you can go and not see anybody that's gathered here for another week, but instead so that you can go out and you can live in community together. So that you're talking with each other on the phone, so that you're texting each other, so that you are helping each other grow in your faith. That you are helping each other navigate the complexities of your life, your work, and connecting all of that together with your faith. It's time that we reclaim this word church for what it was meant to be. A description of who we are and not a place that we gather. We're going to sing a song now in which we're going to provide an opportunity for you to respond. And I know that this is kind of an awkward sermon to respond to. That it's not the normal, you're a sinner, so you kind of need the grace of God, so why don't you come and let all of us, wonder what sins you've committed. It's not that kind of sermon. But it is a tradition that we hold very dearly because we believe that God is working in ways that are beyond our comprehension. And that you may have walked in these doors this morning with something on your heart, and it has absolutely nothing to do with what we've talked about. And I want you to know that you can come and you can share that with us, share that burden, help allow us to carry it with you. And for so many of the rest of us, we need to take this message and we need to start to think about the questions that are in your connection. We need to go, and whenever we get out into our car, we need to pull that out. And instead of thinking about immediately where we're going to go, but maybe we pick one of those questions and we start talking about it together. About who we are in relationship with and how we can live our faith out in this world. Let's stand together as we worship God and respond to the gospel message. A common love for each